Alright, hey guys, Adam Hastings here doing my action research defense. So, in my project, I'm just gonna briefly go over chapters 1 through 3, and then I'll get into talking more about chapters 4 and 5. I know 10 minutes really is not that long. I tried to do a pre pre run at this, and I found myself short on time, so I'll try to quickly get through chapters 1 through 3 so I can talk a little bit more about chapters 4 and 5. So, alright, so for my project, I chose to do music and its effect on student motivation and moderate to vigorous physical activity levels in physical education. The main thing I wanted to look at was if music would produce a better work output for students, which relates to their moderate to vigorous physical activity levels. So, is music going to make them work harder? Also, is it going to motivate them to look harder or work harder? The reason why I chose it was because I have a passion for physical education, obviously, and I also have a passion for music as well. So I wanted to see how music um, would how it would be as a good source for motivating students. I use music all the time when I exercise, and it motivates me to work harder. So I want to see if it would work for my students. As physical education teachers or any teachers, it's really important to find ways to try to motivate our students. So this was what I tried to figure out for my project. Chapters 1 through 3. The current obesity epidemic in the United States is kind of what drove the project. It's becoming more common to look into a PE class and find students that are disengaged or not wanting to participate for multiple reasons. And one of those reasons is related to the obesity epidemic in our country. So students are starting to be more and more sedentary. They're not out exercising. They're not playing sports. They are moving less and less. Um, there's a lot of research that shows that physical activity and obesity are connected. Um, and there's a lot of research that shows the benefits that physical activity can have on uh, obesity and health. Um, just quick numbers on obesity rates in the United States. So, looking at students aged 10 to 17, there is a low of 19% in the state of Utah and a high of 38% in Tennessee. So, those are really high, alarming um, obesity rates, and it's not just children. The obesity rate amongst adults aged 40 to 59 is 41%. This is a huge problem in our country, and I think it's something that can be addressed at a young age. You know, educating students to understand their bodies, understand the benefits of health and physical activity are where it starts. And I also think that doing a project like this and getting students to understand how something like music can also help motivate them to participate more in physical activity can help as well. So, um, another reason for this obesity epidemic is technology. Technology is taking kids further and further away from being active. Things like phones, video games are really getting in the way. And I think it's kind of ironic that I'm doing my action research project using a form of technology, which is music. But this form of technology, I think, is beneficial. Um, as far as motivation, I know music is a extrinsic source of motivation, but I wanted to try to change that extrinsic motivation into an intrinsic motivation. So if students can find, that music is beneficial to them and helps them work harder, then they can take that extrinsic motivation and turn it into a intrinsic motivation. so that they can work harder. So my hypothesis for the project was that music would, in fact, produce higher work outputs. It would also um, improve students' motivation. And then the other thing I looked at was how music would, or how low tempos and high tempos of music would affect um, their work outputs as well. My prediction was that high output or high tempos of music would produce the best work output. So I'll get more into my results a little bit later, but that was just my hypothesis for the project. As far as INTAS standards and what my project really related to was INTASC Standard 3, which is on the learning environment. The teacher works with others to try to create an environment to support individual and collaborative learning, um, encourage social interaction, active engagement in learning, and self motivation. So, like I said earlier, this project really relates to the self motivation piece. Trying to get students to understand the benefits that music has on them and how they can take that into their own lives is really what I tried to get out of this. So, moving on to the questions that I asked, the main question I had was, would music increase MVPA levels? And then the other two, obviously, was music a good source for motivation, and what tempos of music would produce a better work output? And then I'll get into results here in just a second. Um, Starting with my pre-survey, I did a comparison with a pre-survey and a post-survey because I wanted to see how my students' feelings would change about music throughout the project or throughout the research study. On the pre-survey, I asked a few more questions than I did on the post-survey just because these questions on the pre-survey helped guide the study. So I asked, how do you feel about physical activity? How do you feel about music? What genre of music do you enjoy the most? Would you feel more motivated to exercise if music was incorporated into class? Um, would higher low tempos of music motivate you to move more? And how would you feel if music was incorporated into class? So these helped guide my research project just because it helped me get to know my students more. And then from there, I moved on to my post survey. So on the post survey, there were 3 questions that were the same as the pre survey, just because I wanted to see how students' feelings would change from start to finish. So the questions on the post survey they asked were, how do you feel about music being incorporated into class? And the biggest takeaway I got from this and from students' answers was that there was not a single student that said that they would not like music being incorporated in class. Every single one said, yeah, I would enjoy it. Which was a big takeaway because I know, yeah, I should be adding music into class. Did you feel more motivated to exercise as a result of music being added? Again, this was a positive response from students. The students did feel more motivated to exercise as a result of music being added. And then, did a higher or low tempo of music motivate you to move more? So, students, again, said that they thought high music um, would motivate them to move more than low music. Okay, so those were the questions I asked on the survey, and again, they were positive results. So, moving on to the next question I had, which was about whether or not music would increase students' moderate to vigorous physical activity levels. Um, I use this MVPA assessment sheet here to track my students' moderate to vigorous physical activity levels. So what I did was I chose 4 different control environments. So um, I did warm-up activities in my class for 10 minutes each, and I observed 5 random students each day for 10 minutes. Each minute of the study, I would check a yes or a no, stating whether or not they were moving at a moderate to vigorous physical activity level. And those, to receive a yes, they had either be jogging, running, jumping, or doing some sort of muscular strength activity. If they weren't moving or they weren't doing one of those things, they would receive a no. So each minute I would check those off, and then at the end I would tally them up to um, give them their score. And again, this assessment sheet was using um, the SOFIT model. Um, so let me get into my results here. So again, I've got my control groups. I did it with music, without music, a high tempo, and a low tempo of music. Um, what the data showed was that with music, students exercise at a moderate to vigorous physical activity level at 69%. When there was no music present during the 10-minute warm-up activity, only 48% of students were at a moderate to vigorous physical activity level. With a high tempo, 70% of students were at a moderate to vigorous physical activity level, and with a low tempo, 64% of students were at a moderate to vigorous physical activity level. So, again, the results showed with music, there was a improvement in the students' work output than there was without music. So there's a 21% difference in students' levels, which is actually very significant. Um, then there was not a huge difference between high and low tempos, which I expected maybe a little bit bigger of a difference, but the biggest thing was that students were exercising at higher levels with the use of music. So here's results. I kind of already talked about that. As far as like implications go, um, I think this is a very important study, just because it gives me a better idea of how I can best motivate my students. I now know that I should try to use music in as many lessons as possible, just because it shows that it's going to get students to move at higher levels. It's going to get them to enjoy class more, which is going to hopefully in turn relate to NASB Standard 3, which is on getting students to be active for lifetime. If I were to redo this study, I would do the study with more than five students at a time. I'd look at each individual student in the class. I'd also do more sample sizes. So I only did two studies per class. So I would do 2 days with music, 2 days without music, and look at that. I would make that even longer as well. Um, and then I would also try to look at what my students' results were on their surveys, and then look to see how they did in the MVP assessment, to see if they were consistent with what they answered on the survey to how they reacted when music was being played or not being played. So that was my project. I actually enjoyed it a lot and learned a lot, and I think that I will continue to use this study towards my benefit. So, thanks for watching.